So back in the late 1980s, Opel did something good. They built a perfectly sensible executive saloon, and it was called the Omega. It was sleek in a dad's got a promotion sort of way, comfy enough for the daily drive to the office, and fast enough to make merging onto the highway a non-issue. But the people who worked at Opel at the time didn't really care about balance sheets and building cars that made sense. To them, the Omega was well boring. They wanted to build something exciting, and when German engineers get bored, they don't start gardening or learning how to knit. No, they do something far more dangerous. They start thinking about motorsports. And so, in a puff of logic that only really makes sense in the boardrooms of car companies, someone in Rüsselsheim stood up one day and said, "Let's go racing." Not in a new car, not with a sports car, but with the Omega. Yes, the same car you'd find idling in front of the bank. The result? The Opel Omega Evolution 500, a machine that on paper had no business going anywhere near a racetrack, and yet it did. A car built not for the sake of selling sedans, but for the sake of squeaking through DTM's homologation rules. It is, frankly, one of the most underappreciated misfits of the German performance world, and that's exactly why I love it. Now, to understand the Opel Omega 500, you have to understand how mad the German Touring Car Championship was in the late 1980s and early 90s. It was a glorious era when BMW, Mercedes-Benz, Audi and anyone with an ounce of petrol in their veins were going full mad scientist to dominate this touring car blood sport. But there was a catch. You couldn't just build a fire-breathing track car and call it a day. You had to sell a version of that car to the public, and in order to qualify, at least 500 units had to be built and sold to the public. Now, Opel already had the Omega 3000, a car with some poke and a decent chassis, but it wasn't nearly aggressive enough. What they needed was something with actual racing teeth, so they called their tuning partner, an occasional source of lunacy, and gave them a simple brief: turn our executive cruiser into a street-legal DTM homologation monster. The result? The Omega Evolution 500, a car as subtle as a flying brick, with a name that sounds like it was dreamt up by a 12-year-old designing their dream car in Gran Turismo. Now on design, from a distance it looked like just an average Omega. If your average Omega had gone to the gym, taken steroids, and started hanging out with a rough crowd. Every single Evolution 500 came in Nova Black, presumably because matte black wasn't legal at the time. It had widened wheel arches that looked like they were designed with a ruler, and developed body kit with the kind of boxy menace that could frighten children, and best of all, an electronically adjustable spoiler. That spoiler, by the way, could tilt up by a few degrees in order to increase downforce, but mostly it just gave the driver a smug little toy to play with at traffic lights. By the way, if you look at this thing and think, but that's a Lotus Colton, it's not, but we'll get to that a bit later. Anyways, under the bonnet, things started to get interesting. The Omega 500 retained the 3-liter straight 6 from the Omega 3000, but breathed on it in all the right places. It got lighter pistons, rebalanced conrods, and a forged crankshaft with fewer counterweights, allowing it to rev like a teenager on a Red Bull bench. The result was a respectable 230 horsepower at 6,700 RPM. Now I know what you're thinking. 230 horsepower, that's not exactly blowing the doors off it, is it? But here's the thing, this was the early 90s. That sort of power was enough to genuinely terrify unsuspecting passengers, especially when it came with a snarling soundtrack, rear-wheel drive, and a slick shifting manual gearbox. Now with that power, 0 to 100 km per hour or 62 miles per hour was achieved in 7.5 seconds. Top speed was just shy of 250 km per hour. And let's be honest, that's not slow. But of course, the road car wasn't the whole story. The entire reason for the Omega Evolution 500 was so that Opel could go racing. And race it did. Opel fielded the car in DTM through teams like Motorsports, with drivers such as Volker Strytek and Manuel Reiter. trying to make it dance against lighter, smaller rivals like the BMW M3 and the Mercedes-Benz 190e 2.516 Evolution. And to give the Omega a fighting chance, the race car version was properly mental. Stripped to within an inch of its life, the racing Omega Evolution 500 weighed just over 1,000 kilograms. Yes, this big sedan was stripped down to 1 ton. The engine, now a naturally aspirated screamer, churned out a thunderous 420 horsepower. It could hit 100 kilometers per hour in 4.7 seconds, and it only topped out at 320 kilometers per hour. In other words, it went like a stabbed rat. The problem, the Omega was still a big car, and even in race trim, it didn't quite have the poise or agility of its Bavarian and Swabian rivals. While it managed to bag a few respectable finishes, like a 6th place here or a strong qualifying session there, it never really became a constant front runner. It was a bit like sending a bear to a fencing match. Impressive, yes. Terrifying, definitely, but a little too large and a little too brutish for the nimble footwork required. But with all of that being said, this thing raced in DTM. It's a special edition homologation special, so why is it so unpopular? We all know and love the M3, the 190e, and even the Lotus Carlton. Well, despite all of the engineering wizardry and the fact that only 500 were made, the Omega Evolution 500 is one of the most obscure homologation specials out there. Part of this is because of the Lotus Omega, or the Carlton, a car that stole the limelight. That car, with its twin-turbocharged 377 horsepower engine and ridiculous top speed of over 280 km per hour, was the kind of unhinged nonsense that grabbed headlines and pub bragging rights. The Evolution 500, meanwhile, was the quiet sibling that went to school, kept its head down, and occasionally punched someone in the face during recess. It didn't get the press coverage, it didn't get the folklore, and today it survives largely in the garages of die-hard Opel fans, collectors of obscure German muscle, and DTM nerds who think the BMW E30 M3 is too mainstream. But here's the thing, why build the Lotus Carlton if this thing existed? Or even better, why wasn't the Evolution 500 just as wild as Lotus's version? Well, there's an interesting story here too. You see, while the Evolution 500 was quietly being fettled in Rüsselsheim by Irmscher to satisfy DTM's bureaucratic demands, General Motors had other plans for the Omega. Plans that involved Lotus, too much horsepower, and what I can only assume was an excessive quantity of alcohol at a board meeting. Both the Omega 500 and the Lotus Carlton, or Lotus Omega depending on which side of the channel you're from, share the same basic body shell, the Omega A. So yes, under the skin, they are blood relatives, but in practice, they are two very different creatures. Where the Evolution 500 was built to scrape through homologation, the Lotus Carlton was built to declare war on good taste, social responsibility, and national speed limits. It wasn't a motorsport project, it was a marketing fever dream. GM sent an Omega to Lotus and said, "Make this thing fast," and Lotus took that rather literally. So let's line them up. The Evolution 500 was subtle-ish. It had 230 naturally aspirated horses, a reworked 3-litre straight-six engine that revved to the moon, a tidy body kit, and a racing pedigree. It could show off like a medal at a school sports day. It was engineered for balance, for handling, for dancing through the corners of Hockenheim in the shadow of the M3. The Lotus Carlton, meanwhile, was the problem child. Lotus ripped out the engine and jammed in a 3.6-litre twin-turbocharged 36 that could summon 377 horsepower and 420 pound-feet of torque. They bolted on a 6-speed ZF gearbox borrowed from the Corvette ZR1, slapped on AP racing brakes the size of bin lids, and reinforced the rear suspension with enough extra metal to build a swing bridge. It was a brute, a blunt instrument. It went from 0 to 100 km per hour in just over 5 seconds and topped out at around 180 miles per hour, which was faster than the Ferrari 512 Testarossa. And it did all of that while carrying 5 people and a boot full of stolen VHS players. But the real difference between the Evo 500 and the Lotus Carlton isn't in the numbers, it's in the ideology. The Evo 500 was built to go racing, pure and simple. Every inch of it was shaped by motorsport's regulations and the demands of racetrack warfare. It was designed to be balanced, lightweight and compliant with rules that demanded actual production. The Lotus Colton wasn't built for racing. It wasn't even built for the track. It was built to prove a point. That Lotus could turn a middle manager's motorway cruiser into something that could go toe-to-toe with Lamborghini and still carry golf clubs. It was a kind of speed-soaked protest against the growing army of boring, sensible cars, and it was banned in several countries as a result, mostly because it was entirely possible to outrun the police in it. Now, I have made a full video on the Colton in the past, so go and watch it after this if you want to see more. I actually want to make another video on that car as it is so cool and so interesting. I think I can make an even more in-depth video, but that will come way in the future as I have a bunch of ideas for other cars as well. Anyways, there is a twist to this whole tale. You see, despite all the bravado and British lunacy baked into the Lotus Colton, it never raced, not even once. It was too fast, too heavy, and most critically, never homologated. The Evo 500, that actually did go racing. It fought in DTM, even if it never quite cracked the podium regularly. It earned its stripes the right way. So, the car everybody remembers, the legendary Lotus Colton, the Autobahn Outlaw, is the one that didn't race. Meanwhile, the car everybody forgets, the Evo 500, is the one that actually wore a racing suit and got its hands dirty. It's like forgetting the name of an Olympian who actually went to the games because he was too busy looking at his brother doing donuts in the parking lot. But in the end, the Omega 500 and Lotus Colton are two sides of the same gloriously unhinged coin, one built to conquer corners under strict rules, the other built to flatten time itself in a straight line. They're connected, yes, but only by their skeletons. Everything else, the heart, the soul, the madness, is completely different. But together they prove something simple. When Opel stops being sensible, magical things can happen. But at the end of this video, please let me know what you guys think of this car and its story. And also, if you guys did enjoy this video, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps a lot. So please do that. Also, if you guys did enjoy this video, you most probably enjoyed most of my other stuff. So just go through my channel, see if there's something else to like. I'll check you guys in the next one. Cheers,